The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the rugged terrain of Kansas Territory, as Xavier Ingram spotted a column of smoke rising beyond the distant hills. His heart hammered against his ribs, smoke that thick wasn't from any campfire. Spurring his paint horse forward, he abandoned the cattle drive without a second thought, ignoring the foreman's angry shouts that trailed behind him like dust. It was 1858, and the western frontier was as beautiful as it was brutal. Xavier had spent 5 years riding the range, moving from one outfit to the next, never staying long enough to put down roots. At 28, his face weathered by sun and wind, he developed the 1,000-yard stare of a man who'd seen too much hardship. But nothing prepared him for what lay beyond those hills. As he crested the ridge, the sight before him stole the breath from his lungs. What had once been a small homestead was now engulfed in flames, the wooden cabin crackling as fire devoured it hungrily. Xavier dismounted, tying his horse to a scrub oak before creeping closer, Colt revolver drawn. That's when he saw her, a woman standing amidst the inferno, clutching a small child to her chest with one arm while her lips moved in what could only be desperate prayer. Her dress was singed, her face smudged with soot, but even through the shimmer of heat, Xavier could see she was trapped, the flames having encircled her completely. "Hold on," he shouted, rushing forward without thought for his own safety. The heat scorched his face as he approached, bandana pulled up to shield his nose and mouth from the billowing smoke. The woman's eyes widened as she spotted him. "Please," her voice barely carried over the roar of the fire. "Save my son." Xavier tore off his duster coat, wrapping it around himself as makeshift protection. With a deep breath, he plunged through a narrow gap in the flames, reaching the woman and child in 3 long strides. The boy couldn't have been more than 4 years old, his small face buried against his mother's shoulder. "Give him to me," Xavier commanded, already planning their escape route. "I'll get him out first, then come back for you." "No." The woman clutched the child tighter. "We stay together." A burning beam crashed nearby, sending a shower of embers across them. There was no time to argue. Xavier wrapped his coat around both mother and child, then swept them into his arms in one powerful motion. "Hold tight," he ordered, turning to face the wall of flame that separated them from safety. The woman's arms encircled his neck, her body trembling against his. With the child sandwiched protectively between them, Xavier charged through the flames, feeling the searing heat through his boots as embers caught on his pants. They burst through the fire line, Xavier stumbling forward but managing to keep his feet as they reached cooler air. He didn't stop until they were well away from the burning cabin, finally setting the woman down beside a small creek. As she knelt to splash water on her son's soot-stained face, Xavier got his first clear look at her. Despite the dire circumstances, he couldn't help but notice she was beautiful, dark hair falling in waves around a face with delicate features and remarkable amber eyes. She was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 23 or 24. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now, though tears streaked clean paths down her ash-covered cheeks. "You saved our lives. I'm Olivia Miller. This is my son, Thomas." "Xavier Ingram," he replied, removing his hat and dipping it in the creek to fill it with water. "What happened here, Mrs. Miller?" "Miss," she corrected automatically. "Thomas's father. He's been gone since before Thomas was born." Her eyes darkened as she looked back toward the burning cabin. "Raiders came, 5 men on horseback. I hid Thomas in the root cellar when I saw them coming, but they set fire to everything. They were looking for something, kept demanding to know where my husband had hidden it." Xavier handed her his water-filled hat. "Here, drink." As she did, he noticed angry red marks around her wrists. "They tied you up," Olivia nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to cover the marks. I got free when they went to search the barn. I grabbed Thomas and ran, but the fire spread so quickly. We were trapped when you found us. The child Thomas had not spoken a word, his large eyes watching Xavier with a mixture of fear and fascination. Xavier crouched down to the boy's level. "Hello there, young man. That was quite an adventure, wasn't it? You were brave as any soldier I've seen." The boy blinked, then offered a tiny smile before burying his face against his mother's skirt once more. "We need to get you both somewhere safe," Xavier said, rising to his feet. "Leavenworth is about 2 days' ride from here. I've got a friend there who might help us." "I can't impose," Olivia began. "Madam, begging your pardon, but you've got no home. Those men might come back, and your boy needs proper food and rest. It's no imposition." Night was falling fast. Xavier retrieved his horse and fashioned a simple camp a mile from the ruined homestead, in a sheltered hollow where their small fire wouldn't be visible from a distance. He gave Olivia and Thomas his bedroll, insisting they take what rest they could while he kept watch. As the stars appeared overhead, Xavier found himself studying Olivia as she slept. Her son curled against her, one small hand clutching her dress even in sleep. There was something about her, a strength beneath the vulnerability that stirred feelings he'd long thought buried. "Who are you really, Olivia Miller?" he whispered to the night. "And what kind of trouble are you in?" Dawn broke crisp and clear. Xavier had dozed only briefly, staying alert through most of the night. He was preparing coffee over their small fire when Olivia stirred. "You're still here," she murmured, sounding genuinely surprised. "Did you think I'd abandon you in the night?" Xavier asked, handing her a tin cup of the strong brew. "Most men would have," she said simply, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Especially once they realize the complications. I'm not most men." Xavier nodded toward her sleeping son. "Besides, the boy reminds me of someone." "Who?" Xavier's eyes took on a distant look. "My brother. He didn't make it past his 5th birthday. Fever took him." Olivia's face softened. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." Xavier shook himself from the memory. "We should get moving. Those raiders might come back to check their handiwork." They traveled steadily throughout the day, Xavier's horse carrying Olivia and Thomas while he walked alongside, leading the animal by its reins. Thomas gradually warmed to Xavier's presence, peppering him with questions about his life as a cowboy. "You have your own ranch, Mr. Ingram?" the boy asked, bouncing slightly in the saddle. "Xavier," he corrected gently. "And no, I don't. Just been drifting, working cattle drives mostly." "My papa was going to build us a big ranch," Thomas declared, "with hundreds of horses." Xavier noticed the pained expression that flashed across Olivia's face at the mention of the boy's father. When Thomas's attention was diverted by a hawk circling overhead, he asked quietly, "The boy's father? What happened to him?" Olivia's gaze remained fixed between her horse's ears. "James wasn't who he claimed to be. He came with promises and plans, then disappeared one night with what little money I had. I later learned he had a wife in St. Louis." Her voice hardened. "Thomas never knew him, which is probably for the best." "And the homestead?" "I used what my parents left me to buy that land. Built a life there, just Thomas and me." Pride tinged her words, despite the loss she'd just suffered. 3 years of hard work, gone in an hour. Xavier felt admiration bloom alongside his growing attraction. "You're a remarkable woman, Miss Miller." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Hardly. Just stubborn, my father would say." That evening they made camp in a protected gully, having covered good ground despite the slow pace. While Thomas slept, exhausted from the day's journey, Xavier and Olivia sat by the fire. "Those men," Xavier said carefully, "they were looking for something specific, weren't they?" Olivia tensed visibly. "Yes. If they come looking for you again, I need to know what we're facing." She was silent for so long Xavier thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she sighed. "Before he left, James gave me a small lockbox to hold for him, said it contained papers for our future. I never opened it, didn't even have the key. It meant nothing to me, just another broken promise." Her fingers twisted nervously in her skirt. "When those men came, their leader described that box exactly. They're convinced I still have it. Do you?" "No. After a year passed with no word from James, I buried it near the creek. I thought it might contain something for Thomas someday. But during the raid, I told them I'd thrown it in the river months ago." Xavier considered this information carefully. "They didn't believe you." "No. They said they'd be back, that next time they'd—" Her voice faltered. "Next time they'd make sure I remembered correctly." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Xavier's jaw tightened, a protective instinct rising within him that went beyond simple duty or compassion. "You'll be safe in Leavenworth," he promised, though he wasn't entirely sure he could keep that vow. Whatever was in that box clearly held significant value to someone dangerous. "Why are you helping us?" Olivia asked suddenly. "You don't know me. You owe me nothing." Xavier stared into the flames, considering his answer carefully. "When I was 16, my mother and sister were caught in a flash flood. Strangers pulled them out, gave them shelter, asked for nothing in return." He looked up, meeting Olivia's gaze. "Maybe I'm just paying that forward." But even as he said it, Xavier knew there was more. Something about Olivia Miller and her quiet dignity in the face of disaster called to him. It had been a long time since he'd felt anything but the restless urge to move on. Their journey continued at dawn, the landscape gradually changing as they approached more settled territory. By midday, they'd encountered a trading post where Xavier was able to purchase supplies with the small amount of money he carried. He insisted Olivia accept a new shawl to replace her fire-damaged one, brushing aside her protests. "Consider it an investment," he said with a wink to Thomas. "Can't have my traveling companions looking like they just escaped a burning building." Thomas giggled, the first real laughter Xavier had heard from the boy. The sound warmed something inside him that had been cold for far too long. That night, as they camped within a day's ride of Leavenworth, Xavier noticed Olivia watching him as he taught Thomas how to whittle a simple whistle from a piece of willow. "You're good with him," she observed when Thomas had finally succumbed to sleep, clutching his new treasure. "He's a good kid. You've raised him well on your own." "I've tried." Her voice caught slightly. "But there are things a boy should learn from a man, things I can't teach him." Xavier nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. "You'll rebuild, Olivia. You're strong enough." "Am I?" For the first time, her composure cracked, revealing the depth of her fear and uncertainty. "Everything I built is gone. I have nothing left but Thomas." "That's not nothing," Xavier said softly. "That's everything." Impulsively, Olivia reached across the space between them, her hand finding his. "Thank you, Xavier. Not just for saving us, but for seeing me." Their eyes met across the flickering firelight, and something shifted between them, a recognition of shared loneliness, perhaps, or the first tentative bridge across the gulf that separated their lives. Xavier's fingers tightened around hers, warm and calloused. "Get some rest," he said gently, though he made no move to withdraw his hand. "Tomorrow we reach Leavenworth." They arrived in Leavenworth, Kansas territory by late afternoon the following day. The bustling frontier town was a shock after days on the trail streets crowded with wagons and riders, the air filled with the sounds of commerce and construction. Leavenworth was growing rapidly, its position on the Missouri River making it a vital hub for westward expansion. Xavier led them directly to a modest two-story building with a hand-painted sign reading Quinn's Mercantile and Boarding House. As they dismounted, an imposing man with a shock of silver hair emerged from the doorway. "Xavier Ingram, as I live and breathe." The man boomed, clapping Xavier on the shoulder with enough force to stagger him. "3 years without a word, and you show up on my doorstep looking like you've been dragged through hell backward." "Hello, Patrick," Xavier grinned, genuinely pleased to see his old friend. "I'd like you to meet Miss Olivia Miller and her son, Thomas. They're in need of lodging." Patrick Quinn's shrewd eyes took in Olivia's worn appearance and Thomas's solemn face. Whatever questions he had, he kept them to himself. "Any friend of Xavier's is welcome here," he declared, ushering them inside. "My wife, Margaret, will get you settled." The interior of Quinn's establishment was warm and well kept, the front room serving as a general store while the rear and upper floor functioned as a small boarding house. Margaret Quinn, a petite woman with kind eyes, immediately took charge, whisking Olivia and Thomas upstairs to a small but clean room while insisting that they would discuss payment after a proper meal and a good night's rest. Left alone with Patrick, Xavier gave a condensed version of the events that had brought them to Leavenworth. "Raiders, you say?" Patrick frowned, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey for each of them. "There's been trouble lately, groups of men claiming to be border militia, using the tensions between Free State and Slave State supporters as excuse to rob and pillage. These men weren't interested in politics," Xavier said. "They were looking for something specific." Patrick's expression darkened. "Be careful, Xavier. Leavenworth may be growing civilized, but there's still plenty of lawlessness. The territorial marshal has his hands full with the border disputes. I just need a few days to help them get settled, maybe find work for Olivia." Xavier stared into his whiskey. "Then I'll be moving on." Patrick gave him a knowing look. "Will you now, because the way you watch that young woman suggests otherwise." Xavier's head snapped up. "It's not like that." "No," Patrick chuckled. "Well, perhaps it should be. You've been drifting too long, son. Even the most restless stallion eventually needs a home pasture." Before Xavier could respond, Margaret appeared to announce that dinner was ready. The meal was simple but plentiful: roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh baked bread. Thomas, overwhelmed by the events of recent days, fell asleep at the table, his small head nodding forward until Xavier gently lifted him and carried him upstairs to the room he would share with his mother. As he laid the boy on one of the twin beds, Olivia watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable in the dim lamplight. "Will you be staying?" she asked quietly as he straightened. "At Quinn's? For a night or two, yes." "I meant in Leavenworth." Xavier hesitated. "I hadn't planned to." Something like disappointment flickered across her face. "Of course, you have your own path to follow." "Olivia, no, please." She raised a hand to stop him. "You've done more than enough. I don't expect. That is, you owe us nothing further." The formal tone stung more than Xavier expected. "I'll help you find work before I leave," he said, his own voice stiffening slightly. "Patrick has connections throughout town." "Thank you." She moved aside to let him pass through the doorway. "Good night, Xavier." "Good night," he replied, painfully aware of the distance that seemed to have sprung up between them. Xavier spent a restless night in a small room at the back of Quinn's establishment, his thoughts circling endlessly around Olivia Miller. By dawn, he'd made a decision. He would stay in Leavenworth long enough to ensure Olivia and Thomas were safe and settled, then continue on his way. It was better for everyone. He wasn't cut out for permanence, and they deserved stability, not the uncertainty of a drifter's life. Over breakfast, Patrick mentioned that the local school was seeking an assistant teacher. "The schoolmaster's wife mentioned it yesterday," he explained. Nothing fancy, mind you, but steady pay and respectable work for a woman of education. Olivia looked up hopefully. I taught children back home in Ohio before coming west. Perfect, Margaret declared. I'll take you to meet Mr. Chambers this morning, and Thomas can start attending once you're settled. Xavier watched the boy's face light up at this prospect. Despite everything he'd been through, Thomas retained a child's resilience and curiosity. "And what about you, Xavier?" Patrick inquired. "The Triple R Ranch is looking for experienced hands. Old man Richardson is expanding his operation now that the railroad's coming through." The offer was tempting steady work on a reputable ranch, a chance to put down roots in a growing community. But the familiar restlessness tugged at him, the same feeling that had kept him moving from job to job, town to town for years. "I'll think about it," he said noncommittally. 2 days later, Olivia secured the teaching position, along with a small room in the schoolmaster's house for herself and Thomas. Xavier helped them move their few possessions, awkwardly lingering as Olivia thanked him once again for his assistance. "I don't know how to repay you," she said, standing in the doorway of her new quarters. "Seeing you safe is payment enough," Xavier replied, hat in hands. "I should be heading out tomorrow or the next day." "So soon?" The disappointment in her voice seemed genuine, and it made his resolve waver. "I've stayed in one place too long already," he said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. Thomas appeared behind his mother, clutching the wooden whistle Xavier had carved for him. "Will you come say goodbye before you go?" the boy asked. Xavier knelt down to Thomas's level. "I promise." As he walked back to Quinn's, Xavier couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake. For the first time in years, he'd found people who stirred something in him beyond the desire to keep moving. Yet here he was, preparing to leave again, following a pattern so ingrained he hardly questioned it anymore. That evening, as Xavier sat on the boarding house porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Patrick joined him with 2 glasses of whiskey. "So you're leaving," the older man said without preamble. "Word travels fast. Small town." Patrick handed him a glass. "Can I ask you something, Xavier? What exactly are you running from?" The question hit with unexpected force. "Who says I'm running?" 5 years of drifting says it pretty clearly," Patrick replied mildly. "I've known you since you were a green kid fresh off your father's farm. You've always had restless feet, but this is different." Xavier took a long swallow of whiskey, welcoming the burn. "Maybe I just prefer the freedom." "Freedom?" Patrick scoffed. "There's no freedom in running, son. Only the illusion of it. True freedom comes from knowing exactly where you belong and choosing to stay there." Before Xavier could formulate a response, a commotion in the street caught their attention. 3 riders were approaching at a brisk pace, their horses kicking up dust as they drew to a halt in front of the mercantile. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Patrick called, setting his glass aside as he rose. The leader, a hard-faced man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, dismounted smoothly. "Looking for information," he drawled. "Heard tell of a woman and child new to town. Pretty little thing, dark hair, boy about 4 or 5. Xavier felt his blood run cold. These had to be the raiders Olivia had described, or at least some of them. He remained seated, keeping his face neutral as he took another sip of whiskey. "Lots of newcomers passing through," Patrick said carefully. "What's your interest in this particular woman? Family matter?" The man replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Her husband's mighty worried about her, running off like she did." "Husband?" Xavier couldn't stop himself from blurting the word. The scarred man's gaze snapped to him. "That's right. James Miller's been half out of his mind with worry, just trying to reunite a family, you understand." The lie was so blatant Xavier nearly laughed. Instead, he stood slowly, casually resting his hand near the gun at his hip. "Funny thing about that. The James Miller I heard about abandoned his family years ago. Has a wife in St. Louis, I believe." The atmosphere shifted instantly, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. The scarred man's hand twitched toward his own weapon. "Don't know what tales she's been spinning," he said, voice hardening, "but we aim to find her. She has something that doesn't belong to her." "Nothing here for you," Patrick interjected firmly. "I suggest you gentlemen move along." For a tense moment, Xavier thought it might come to violence right there on the street. Then the scarred man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "We'll be in town a few days," he announced, remounting his horse. "When you remember seeing this woman, there's good money for information." His eyes lingered on Xavier with unmistakable menace. Real good money. As the three riders moved off toward the saloon at the end of the street, Patrick turned to Xavier with a grave expression. "Those are the raiders," he asked quietly. "3 of them, at least," Xavier confirmed. "I need to warn Olivia." Patrick nodded. "Go now." "I'll see what I can learn about these men. Something tells me they didn't just happen upon Leavenworth by chance." Xavier found Olivia at the schoolhouse, preparing lessons for the following day. Thomas was playing with the schoolmaster's children in the yard behind the building. When she saw Xavier's face, Olivia immediately knew something was wrong. "They're here," she whispered, her face draining of color. "The raiders." 3 of them, Xavier confirmed. "They're asking questions, looking for you and Thomas." Olivia sank into a chair, her hands trembling slightly. "What do we do?" "We need to move you somewhere safer, for starters," Xavier said, his mind racing through options. "Quinn's has a storeroom with a hidden cellar, used it during border troubles last year. You and Thomas can stay there tonight while we figure this out." "And then what? Keep hiding?" "Run again." Olivia's voice cracked with frustration. "I'm tired of running, Xavier. I want Thomas to have a stable life." "I know." Xavier knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "But we need time to deal with these men properly. They think you still have whatever was in that lockbox." Olivia's eyes widened suddenly. "The box, Xavier, what if it's still there at the homestead? You buried it, you said." "Yes, near the big cottonwood by the creek. If they find it, they won't," Xavier assured her. "But we might need to." The plan came together quickly. Xavier would escort Olivia and Thomas to Quinn's hidden cellar, while Patrick made discreet inquiries about the raiders. Meanwhile, the town marshal would be informed not of Olivia's presence, but of the suspicious men making threats and offering bribes for information. As night fell, Xavier led Olivia and Thomas through the back alleys of Leavenworth to Quinn's Mercantile. Patrick met them at the rear entrance, guiding them through the storeroom to a trapdoor concealed beneath stacks of flour sacks. "It's not palatial," Patrick apologized as they descended into the small, low-ceilinged space, "but it's dry and safe. No one will find you here." Thomas, treating the whole affair as an adventure, immediately began exploring the small cellar while Olivia took stock of the provisions Patrick had prepared: blankets, lanterns, food, and water. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now that action was being taken. "Both of you." "I'll be back by morning," Xavier promised. "Try to get some rest." As he turned to leave, Olivia caught his arm. "Xavier, be careful." The genuine concern in her eyes stirred something deep within him. Impulsively, he leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I will." Outside, Xavier joined Patrick at the bar of the local saloon, positioned to observe the 3 raiders who were engaged in a boisterous game of cards. The scarred leader, who Patrick had learned was known only as Reeves, was drinking heavily, his laughter growing louder as the evening progressed. "Marshal Donovan says he's heard of this Reeves," Patrick murmured. "Suspected of robbery and murder down in Missouri. rides with different crews, never stays in one place long enough for the law to catch up. Professional, then, Xavier observed grimly, not just some random bandits. Which means whatever was in that box must be valuable indeed. Around midnight, Reeves and his companions staggered out of the saloon toward the cheap boarding house at the edge of town. Xavier and Patrick followed discreetly, watching until the lights went out in their rooms. "What's your plan?" Patrick asked as they walked back toward the mercantile. "I need to get to Olivia's homestead," Xavier replied. "Find that box before they do." "That's 2 days' hard ride each way. I know, but it might be the only way to end this." Patrick studied his friend's determined expression. "You care for her, don't you? More than you're admitting, even to yourself." Xavier didn't answer immediately, the question forcing him to confront feelings he'd been avoiding. "She deserves better than a drifter with nothing to offer," he finally said. "That's not what I asked," Patrick replied softly. "And you might be surprised what a woman like that considers valuable in a man." Dawn found Xavier preparing to leave, his saddlebags packed with supplies for the journey. He'd explained his plan to Olivia, who had drawn him a detailed map showing exactly where she had buried the mysterious lockbox. "Whatever's inside," she told him, "it's not worth your life. If there's trouble, just leave it." "Let me worry about that," he replied. "You and Thomas stay hidden. Patrick and Margaret will look after you." Thomas, still sleepy-eyed in the dim light of the cellar, hugged Xavier's legs. "Will you come back?" Xavier crouched down, meeting the boy's earnest gaze. "I promise." As he straightened, Olivia stepped forward, hesitating only briefly before wrapping her arms around him in a fierce embrace. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for everything." Xavier held her close, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised, though the words felt inadequate for the emotions swelling within him. He rode out of Leavenworth as the town was just beginning to stir, pushing his horse at a steady pace that would cover ground without exhausting the animal. The journey back to Olivia's homestead was uneventful but tense, every passing rider or distant figure a potential threat. When Xavier finally crested the ridge overlooking the burnt remains of the cabin, the landscape looked eerily peaceful. Nature was already beginning to reclaim the scorched earth, green shoots pushing through the ash. Following Olivia's map, he located the large cottonwood by the creek. The spot where she'd buried the lockbox was marked by a distinctive pattern of stones she had arranged to help her remember the location. Xavier dismounted, retrieving a small shovel from his saddlebags. The earth was soft near the water, and it didn't take long to uncover a small metal box, approximately the size of a thick book. It showed signs of corrosion from its time underground but appeared intact, secured with a heavy padlock. Xavier turned the box over in his hands, tempted to break it open and discover what secret had cost Olivia so dearly. But it wasn't his secret to uncover. Wrapping the box in an oilcloth, he secured it in his saddlebag and remounted, eager to begin the journey back to Leavenworth, back to Olivia. He'd traveled barely an hour when the sound of approaching horses reached him. Xavier veered off the trail into a stand of trees, watching as 4 riders appeared on the horizon. Even at a distance, he recognized the scarred face of Reeves. Somehow, they had discovered his mission and followed. Perhaps they had been watching Quinn's establishment, or maybe someone in Leavenworth had been paid for information. It hardly mattered now. Xavier had 2 choices: stand and fight against overwhelming odds, or try to outrun them back to Leavenworth. The first option was likely suicide. The second put Olivia and Thomas at risk if he led the raiders directly to them. A third possibility occurred to him as he studied the terrain ahead. If he could reach Devil's Canyon, a treacherous maze of narrow ravines about 10 miles east, he might be able to lose his pursuers, or at least choose more favorable ground for a confrontation. Digging his heels into his horse's flanks, Xavier broke from cover and raced toward the canyon, the shouts of the raiders erupting behind him as they gave chase. The next hours became a blur of dust and danger as Xavier pushed his mount to its limits, staying just ahead of his pursuers while navigating increasingly rugged terrain. By the time he reached Devil's Canyon, his horse was lathered with sweat, its breathing labored. Xavier dismounted at the canyon entrance, leading the exhausted animal into the maze of towering rock walls and narrow passages. The sun was beginning its westward descent, shadows lengthening in the canyon, providing additional cover. Xavier found a defensible position, a small alcove with a clear view of the approach but protected on 3 sides by rock walls. Securing his horse, he checked his weapons: the Colt revolver, a rifle, and a hunting knife. Not enough for a prolonged battle, but perhaps enough to discourage pursuit if he could eliminate 1 or 2 of the raiders. He didn't have to wait long. The sound of horses echoed through the canyon, followed by Reeves's voice calling out, "We know you're in here, Cowboy. Just give us the box and you can ride away." Xavier remained silent, adjusting his position to better cover the approach. "That woman lied to you," Reeves continued. "Whatever she told you, it wasn't the truth. She's a thief and a murderer." The accusation was so outlandish Xavier almost laughed. Olivia Miller, with her gentle hands and fierce dedication to her son, a murderer. It was a transparent attempt to create doubt. The raiders spread out, moving cautiously through the canyon. Xavier tracked their movements, waiting until the first man came into view before firing a warning shot that sent the raider scrambling for cover. "Next one won't miss," Xavier called. "Turn around and ride out while you still can." A barrage of gunfire answered him, bullets pinging off the rock walls around his position. Xavier returned fire selectively, conserving ammunition while keeping the raiders pinned down. As daylight faded, the standoff continued, neither side gaining advantage. Xavier knew he couldn't hold out indefinitely. He was outnumbered and eventually would run out of ammunition. But nightfall might provide cover for escape. When full darkness descended, Xavier made his move. Leaving his position, he crept silently through the canyon, using skills honed through years of hunting to avoid detection. He managed to circle behind one of the raiders, subduing the man with a swift blow that left him unconscious but alive. Taking the raiders' weapons and ammunition, Xavier continued his stealthy progress, eventually reaching his horse. The animal had recovered somewhat during the rest, though it was still far from fresh. "Just need to get clear of the canyon, boy," Xavier murmured, patting the horse's neck as he checked the saddlebags to ensure the lockbox was still secure. He was preparing to mount when a voice spoke from the darkness. "That's far enough." Xavier turned slowly to find Reeves standing 10 feet away, revolver aimed steadily at Xavier's chest. "Hand over the box," Reeves demanded. "What's in it?" Xavier asked, stalling for time as he assessed his options. "Must be mighty valuable for all this trouble." Reeves's scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. "Valuable enough to die for, which is what you're about to do unless you hand it over." "Maps," came another voice as a second raider emerged from the shadows. "Land deeds showing where gold was discovered in California." "Miller stole them from our boss." "Olivia's husband stole them, you mean," Xavier corrected. "Same difference," Reeves shrugged. "She's his wife, she's responsible." "Ex-wife," Xavier said. "And she knew nothing about what was in that box." Reeves's patience visibly thinned. "Enough talk." "The box. Now." Xavier's mind raced. He was outgunned and trapped. But if what the raiders said was true, the contents of the box were indeed valuable, possibly valuable enough to secure Olivia's future if he could get it back to her. In one fluid motion, Xavier drew his revolver, diving sideways as Reeves fired. Pain exploded in Xavier's left shoulder, but his own shot found its mark, striking Reeves in the chest. The scarred man staggered backward, shock registering on his face before he crumpled to the ground. The second raider got off 2 wild shots before Xavier's return fire dropped him as well. Then silence fell over the canyon, broken only by Xavier's ragged breathing and the nervous shuffling of his horse. Clutching his wounded shoulder, Xavier managed to pull himself into the saddle. Blood soaked his shirt, but the bullet appeared to have passed clean through muscle without hitting bone or artery. Painful, but not immediately life-threatening if he could stop the bleeding. Using strips torn from his bandana, Xavier fashioned a crude pressure bandage before urging his horse forward. He needed to put distance between himself and the remaining raiders, who would likely flee once they discovered their leader dead, but might regroup for revenge if given time. The journey back to Leavenworth became a haze of pain and determination. Xavier pushed on through the night, stopping only briefly to rest his horse and tighten his bandage. By dawn, he was running a fever, the wound hot and throbbing beneath his makeshift dressing. Still, he pressed forward, driven by the need to return to Olivia, to ensure her safety, to place the lockbox in her hands and finally end the threat hanging over her and Thomas. It was nearing dusk of the second day when Xavier finally spotted the outskirts of Leavenworth. His vision swam, exhaustion and blood loss taking their toll. Somehow he made it to Quinn's Mercantile, practically falling from his horse as Patrick rushed from the building. "Good God, Xavier!" The older man caught him as his knees buckled. "Margaret, get the doctor." "Olivia," Xavier managed to rasp. "Thomas, are they safe?" "They're fine," Patrick assured him, helping him inside. Still hiding in the cellar, the raiders' other 2 men came back to town looking for Reeves, but Marshal Donovan ran them off when they started causing trouble. Xavier fumbled with his saddlebag. "The box, I got it." Patrick took the oilcloth-wrapped package, setting it aside as he helped Xavier to a chair. "That can wait. You're half dead, man." The next hours passed in a blur of pain as the town doctor arrived to clean and properly bandage Xavier's wound, administering laudanum for the pain. Through the drug-induced haze, Xavier was vaguely aware of concerned voices and gentle hands, of being moved to a bed, of cool cloths on his fevered brow. When he finally regained full consciousness, sunlight was streaming through a window. He was in a small room at the back of Quinn's establishment, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but the fire of infection noticeably cooled. A movement beside the bed drew his attention. Olivia was curled in a chair, asleep, her hand resting near his on the coverlet. The sight of her safe, whole and waiting for him filled Xavier with a warmth that had nothing to do with fever. As if sensing his gaze, Olivia stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she simply stared at him, relief washing over her features. Then she was on her feet, leaning over him, one hand gently touching his face as if to confirm he was truly awake. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised I would," Xavier replied, his voice rough from disuse. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "They told me you might die. That the infection was bad. Takes more than a bullet to stop me," he assured her, though in truth, he'd had moments on that long ride back when he'd feared exactly that outcome. Olivia's fingers traced the line of his jaw, her touch feather light. "Why did you do it? Risk your life for us?" The question hung between them, demanding an honest answer. Xavier could have deflected, could have claimed it was simply the right thing to do. Instead, he captured her hand in his, bringing it to his lips. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of never seeing you again," he admitted. "You and Thomas. You've become important to me, more important than I thought possible." A tear slipped down Olivia's cheek. "I was so afraid you wouldn't come back, that I'd lost you before I even had the chance to tell you." "Tell me what?" Xavier prompted gently when she faltered. "That I think I'm falling in love with you," she confessed, the words rushing out as if she feared losing the courage to speak them. "I know it's fast and probably foolish." But Xavier cut off her words in the most effective way possible, drawing her down for a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened, conveying all the emotions he struggled to express in words. When they finally parted, both breathless, Xavier smiled. "Not foolish at all, not if I'm falling just as hard." A delighted squeal from the doorway announced Thomas's presence. The boy launched himself at the bed, only Olivia's quick intervention preventing him from landing directly on Xavier's injured shoulder. "Easy there, young man," Xavier laughed, ruffling the boy's hair with his good hand. "I'm still a bit broken." "Mama said you were sleeping to get better," Thomas informed him seriously. "I was very quiet, but you've been sleeping for days and days." 3 days, Olivia clarified with a smile. "The doctor says you're past the worst now, but you need to rest." "What about the lockbox?" Xavier asked, suddenly remembering the reason for his dangerous journey. "Patrick has it," Olivia replied. "We haven't opened it yet. I wanted to wait for you." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Patrick appeared in the doorway, Margaret beside him carrying a tray of food. "Thought I heard voices," the older man said with evident satisfaction. "Welcome back to the land of the living, son." After Xavier had eaten and the doctor had been summoned to examine his improving condition, Patrick retrieved the lockbox. They gathered around Xavier's bed, Olivia, Thomas, Patrick, and Margaret, as Xavier handed the box to Olivia. "It's yours," he said. "Whatever's inside." Olivia studied the corroded padlock. "I never had the key. Allow me." Patrick produced a heavy set of bolt cutters, making short work of the lock. With trembling hands, Olivia opened the box. Inside lay several folded documents, a small leather pouch, and a sealed envelope. She examined the documents first, her eyes widening as she read. "Land deeds," she confirmed, "and maps showing gold deposits in California." She looked up, bewildered. The raiders were telling the truth about that much, at least. "What's in the pouch?" Thomas asked, bouncing with curiosity. Olivia untied the leather strings, tipping the contents into her palm. Several gold nuggets gleamed in the lamplight, along with what appeared to be uncut gemstones. "Samples," Patrick guessed. "Proof the claims are legitimate." Finally, Olivia opened the sealed envelope, reading the enclosed letter silently, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. "What is it?" Xavier prompted gently when she remained silent. "It's from James," she said, her voice unsteady. He says he's sorry for deceiving me. That he was already in trouble when we met, already married. That he used me as a hiding place for these documents, which he stole from his employer, someone named Victor Blackwood." "Blackwood," Patrick interjected. "I've heard that name." "Mining magnate from San Francisco, reputation for ruthlessness." Olivia continued reading. "James says he intended to come back for the box, but Blackwood's men were closing in. He writes that if I'm reading this, he's probably dead, and that the documents are now mine, his payment for the pain he caused." She looked up, tears in her eyes. "He says to use them to build a good life for our son." "Mama," Thomas's voice was small, confused by his mother's tears. "Is that from my papa?" Olivia gathered the boy into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart, it is." The implication settled over the room like dust after a storm. The documents were valuable extraordinarily so, but they were also dangerous, having already cost lives and nearly cost more. What will you do? Xavier asked softly. Olivia met his gaze, resolve hardening in her eyes. These were stolen, she said firmly. No matter what James wrote, they don't belong to me. They need to be returned to their rightful owner. Blackwood might not be the rightful owner either, Patrick pointed out. Those gold deposits could be on public land, or land already claimed by others. Then they should go to the territorial authorities, Olivia insisted. I won't build Thomas's future on theft and deception. We've made it this far honestly. We'll continue that way. Xavier felt a surge of admiration for her principled stand. Whatever you decide, he said, I'll support you. The decision was made to entrust the documents to Marshal Donovan, who would ensure they reached the proper authorities in California. The gold and gems, being of less certain provenance, the marshal suggested Olivia keep considerate compensation for your troubles, he advised. Over the next 2 weeks, as Xavier recovered from his wound, he and Olivia grew closer. They spent long evenings talking, sharing stories of their pasts and cautious hopes for the future. Thomas attached himself to Xavier with the unquestioning devotion of a child who had found a hero, insisting that Xavier teach him to ride and rope once he was fully healed. He adores you, Olivia observed one evening as they sat on the schoolhouse steps, watching Thomas chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The feeling's mutual, Xavier admitted. He's a remarkable boy. He needs a father, Olivia said quietly. A real one. Xavier's heart stuttered in his chest. Olivia, I'm not asking for promises, she hurried to add. I know you have your own path, your own life. I want you to know that if you ever decided to stay, there would be a place for you, with us. Xavier took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit within his own. I've been running for so long, he confessed. After my brother died, then my parents, I couldn't bear to stay and watch everything I loved be taken away again, so I left before it could happen. And now I'm terrified, he admitted with a rueful smile, because for the first time in years, I've found someone worth the risk of staying. Olivia's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Is that a yes? Instead of answering directly, Xavier reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object he'd been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. It was a simple ring fashioned from silver, hastily purchased from the town jeweler, but chosen with heartfelt intention. I can't offer much, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I'm not a wealthy man, but everything I am, everything I have is yours if you want it. Olivia's breath caught as he held out the ring. Xavier, I love you, Olivia Miller, you and Thomas both. I want to build a life with you, a real life, with roots and a future. If you'll have me. For one heart-stopping moment, Olivia was silent, tears streaming freely down her face. Then she threw her arms around his neck, mindful of his healing shoulder, and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that contained her answer even before she whispered, Yes. Oh, yes. Thomas, attracted by his mother's cry, came running back. What's happening? He demanded, eyeing their embrace with childish suspicion. Xavier pulled back slightly, keeping one arm around Olivia as he addressed the boy seriously. Thomas, I've asked your mother a very important question. I've asked if I could become part of your family, if I could be a father to you and a husband to her. Thomas's eyes widened, like in the stories, where they live happily ever after, just like that, Xavier confirmed, if it's all right with you. The boy considered this solemnly for all of 3 seconds before breaking into a wide grin. Does this mean you'll teach me to be a cowboy? For real? Laughter bright and full of promise broke from both adults. Yes, Xavier assured him. For real. The wedding took place a month later in Leavenworth's small church, with Patrick standing as Xavier's best man and Margaret helping Olivia prepare. The whole town seemed to turn out for the celebration afterward, impressed by the romantic tale of the drifting cowboy who had rescued a woman and child from a burning homestead and found his home in the process. With the modest sum from the gold nuggets and Xavier's savings, they purchased a small parcel of land outside Leavenworth, nothing grand, but good soil with a creek running through it and ample grazing for the horses Xavier planned to raise. Together, they built a sturdy cabin, larger and better constructed than Olivia's lost homestead. Life settled into a rhythm of work and joy. Xavier took the position at the Triple R Ranch, earning steady pay while he developed their own property in his free time. Olivia continued teaching, her gentle manner and intelligence making her beloved by students and parents alike. Thomas thrived, growing strong and confident under the guidance of the father who had chosen him. A year after their wedding, as summer ripened toward autumn, Olivia shared news that completed their family's circle. She was expecting a child. Xavier's reaction dropping to his knees to press his ear against her still flat stomach, while Thomas danced around them in excitement, became one of Olivia's most treasured memories. Their daughter, Emma Grace Ingram, was born the following spring, a robust baby with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Thomas appointed himself her protector and guide, taking his role as big brother with utmost seriousness. 5 years after Xavier had first crested that hill and seen smoke rising beyond the horizon, their homestead was prosperous and growing. The horse breeding operation had expanded, Xavier's skill with the animals bringing buyers from as far as St. Louis. Olivia had become the head teacher at Leavenworth's growing school, respected throughout the community for her intelligence and compassion. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Xavier took Olivia riding to a hilltop overlooking their property. The late afternoon sun gilded the landscape, catching on the weather vane atop their home and the rippling waters of the creek where Thomas, now 9 and every inch, a young cowboy, was teaching 5-year-old Emma to fish. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked softly as they sat side by side. "Giving up your wandering ways?" Xavier turned to her, his weathered face softened by the smile that was reserved only for her. "Not for a single moment," he assured her, drawing her close. "How could I regret finding everything I never knew I was searching for?" Below them, Thomas's whoop of triumph signaled a successful catch, Emma's delighted laughter floating up on the breeze. Their home, solid, welcoming, built with love and perseverance, stood as testament to the journey that had brought them together. "You know," Xavier murmured against Olivia's hair, "for a man who spent years running, I've discovered something important." "What's that?" she asked, leaning into his embrace. "Home isn't a place," he said simply. "It's wherever you are. It always will be." As the sun began its descent beyond the western hills, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson that rivaled the fire where they'd first met, Xavier and Olivia Ingram held each other close, no longer a cowboy and a woman with nothing but prayer, but a family forged in adversity and bound by a love stronger than any danger they had faced or any challenge that might lie ahead. In the distance, smoke rose from their chimney, a beacon guiding them home as darkness fell, not a signal of destruction as it had been on that fateful day, but a promise of warmth, safety, and the life they had built together on the Kansas frontier.